He tried to escape San Quentin. What happened next will shock you. The moment of truth, it's the dead of night. The fog rolling off the San Francisco Bay is so thick you could almost taste the salt in the air. Then it happens. A guard spots movement near the north wall, a shadow climbing fast, a ladder where no ladder should be. Before he can shout, the sirens explode through the silence. Red lights flash across the prison yard, and chaos erupts inside San Quentin State Prison. Somebody's escaping. Guards sprint toward the walls. Searchlights slice through the fog. Dogs start barking, echoing off the concrete. And out there, just beyond the fence, one man is running for his life, his orange jumpsuit flashing under the lights before disappearing into the darkness. That man's name is Mark, and what happened after this moment shocked everyone. Guards, inmates, even the people of California. But to understand how he got here, we have to go back to where it all started. Roots of the escaped San Quentin State Prison sits like a fortress on the edge of the bay, surrounded by steel fences, armed towers, and freezing water that makes escape nearly impossible. Built in the 1800s, it's the oldest prison in California, and it's seen every kind of inmate come and go. Most never try to leave. They know what happens if you do. But Mark wasn't like most men. He was 32 years old, serving a long sentence for armed robbery. Smart, quiet, observant, the kind of inmate who never made trouble. He blended in, kept to himself. But behind that calm face, his mind was always working. From the moment he walked through those gates, he made himself a promise. I'm not spending the rest of my life in here. At first, it was just a dream. But slowly, it turned into an obsession. Mark worked on the prison maintenance crew, fixing pipes, changing lights, cleaning walls. It gave him access to places most inmates never saw. He noticed everything: which guards were lazy, which cameras were broken, which gates squeaked, and which ones didn't. Every detail mattered. Over months, he built a mental map of the entire prison. One night in his cell, under the thin glow of a smuggled flashlight, Mark whispered his plan to two other inmates. They were desperate too, both serving time for violent crimes, both with nothing left to lose. Together, they started building what no one had ever built inside San Quentin in decades, a ladder strong enough to carry a man over that wall. They used scraps from the workshop, pieces of wood, stolen nails, and metal braces hidden inside cleaning carts. It took them weeks. Every night they assembled it, piece by piece, taking it apart before morning count. During the day, they watched the guards' patterns. They studied the floodlights. They waited for the right moment. A foggy night when the bay winds were high and visibility was low. When that night finally came, Mark could barely breathe. Dinner was quiet. Nobody spoke. Every sound, the clatter of trays, the slam of cell doors, felt heavier. He lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of his own heartbeat. When the lights went out, it was time. He met his partners near the maintenance shed. Together, they carried the ladder across the yard, keeping low under the shadows of the wall. The fog rolled in thick, muffling the sound of their footsteps. They reached the north fence, the one Mark had studied for months, and set the ladder down. It was shaking, unstable, but it was all they had. Mark went first. His hands trembled as he climbed, every muscle in his body screaming for silence. Halfway up, he looked out over the bay, so close, yet still so far. Then a light flickered behind him. A guard, doing his last round of the night, spotted something strange, movement in the fog. He squinted, stepped closer, and froze. There it was. The ladder. The shadow. A man on the wall. The alarm erupted, slicing through the night. Mark didn't look back. He was already on the edge, one hand gripping the top of the wall, the other reaching for freedom. Behind him, guards were shouting. Guns were drawn. Floodlights blazed across the yard. And then, he jumped. The alarms are still ringing. The fog is swallowing his footsteps. And somewhere out there, a fugitive is running through the night, with every cop in California now hunting him down. What happens next is the part no one expected. The great escape. The moment Mark hit the ground, everything went silent. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but he was alive. For a second, he lay there in the wet grass, staring up at the fog rolling above the prison walls. Behind him, red lights flashed through the mist like lightning. Then he heard the sirens again, louder, angrier this time. He forced himself up and ran. The terrain around San Quentin is brutal. The prison sits right on the edge of the bay, surrounded by cliffs, fences, and icy salt water that stretches for miles. But Mark had planned every inch of this. He followed a narrow maintenance path down toward the shoreline, boots slipping on wet gravel. He could hear voices behind him, guards shouting orders, dogs barking. He kept running. Mark reached the rocky beach just as the floodlights swept overhead. He dropped flat against the stones, hiding beneath an overhang. The water crashed against the rocks, freezing and dark. Somewhere in that black water was his only chance of freedom, because hidden beneath a pile of driftwood, waiting just where he'd left it a week earlier, was an old rubber raft, patched together with glue, tape, and stolen plastic sheeting. He yanked it out, heart pounding, hands shaking. He could already see the beams of flashlights cutting across the beach behind him. Someone yelled, "He's heading for the water." He jumped in. The cold hit like electricity. The bay water was near freezing, stabbing through his body, but adrenaline kept him moving. He kicked, paddled, and pushed the raft away from shore, every breath short and burning. Behind him, gunshots cracked the night air, warning shots, echoing across the bay. Searchlights swept over the water, but the fog was thick, the current fast. Within minutes, Mark was gone. He floated, half conscious, as the tide carried him deeper into the bay. He didn't know where he was going, only that he wasn't in the prison anymore. Hours passed. When the sun started to rise, the fog lifted, and Mark realized where he was. The Golden Gate Bridge stood in the distance, faint through the haze. He was miles from San Quentin, but still trapped by the sea. His arms were numb. The raft was leaking. He spotted a small dock near the shoreline, maybe part of an old marina. With what little strength he had left, he paddled toward it. When he finally reached the dock, he collapsed. His hands were blue, his body shaking violently. But he was free, at least for now. He stumbled up the hill, looking for somewhere to hide. His prison jumpsuit was soaked and torn, so he broke into a nearby tool shed and changed into old work clothes he found hanging inside. He grabbed a hat, a jacket, and a pair of boots 2 sizes too small. For the first time in years, Mark walked without chains. But even as he breathed the cold morning air, he knew this wasn't over. Back at San Quentin, the manhunt had already begun. Helicopters were scanning the coastline. Police boats were combing the bay. Every road around Marin County was being locked down. The warden had made it clear. No one escapes San Quentin and stays free. Mark found a quiet back road and started walking inland, hoping to disappear before sunrise. Every sound made him jump. The crack of a branch, the distant whine of sirens. He was cold, exhausted, and starving, but he kept going. After a few miles, he saw a farmhouse. Smoke rose from the chimney. He hesitated. He needed food, maybe a ride, but he couldn't risk being seen. Still, he stepped closer. He could smell coffee, hear a radio playing inside. He was about to knock when the sound of an engine came from behind him, slow, crunching on gravel. Mark froze. He turned his head. Through the fog, a dark SUV rolled toward the farmhouse, headlights dim, moving quietly, deliberately. And then he saw it. The letters Sheriff, Marin County on the side. Mark's heart stopped. He was trapped, caught between the farmhouse ahead and the police closing in behind him. Would he run again? Hide? Or do something far more dangerous? The manhunt Mark's heart pounded like a drum inside his chest. The dark SUV slowed as it approached the farmhouse. Its headlights swept across the dirt road, lighting up the trees and the old wooden fence. He ducked behind a tractor, pressing himself against the cold metal. He could hear the engine rumble, the crunch of tires on gravel, and then silence. A door opened. Boots hit the ground. A voice called out, "Sheriff's Department. Anyone out here?" Mark's pulse raced. He knew that voice wasn't calling for the farmer. It was calling for him. Somehow, they'd tracked him here. Maybe a trail in the mud, maybe a camera near the dock. Whatever it was, they were close. Too close. The back door of the farmhouse opened. An old man stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. "Morning, Sheriff," he said. "You boys out early?" "Looking for an escapee from San Quentin," the officer replied. "He might be dangerous." Mark held his breath. He could hear every word. His entire body was shaking, not from cold this time, from fear. The sheriff's voice got closer. "If you see anything unusual, call us right away." He could be hiding anywhere. The old man nodded. "Ain't seen nobody. Just me and the chickens." The sheriff hesitated, scanning the property. His flashlight beamed past just inches from where Mark was hiding. Then it moved on. The SUV started up again, rolling slowly down the road. Mark waited until the sound faded before he moved. He couldn't stay here. Not another minute. He crawled out from behind the tractor and slipped through a line of trees at the edge of the property. His legs were weak, his breath coming in sharp bursts, but he pushed forward. He knew they were closing in. Every minute counted. He followed a dirt trail that led into the woods. The fog was lifting, but now the sun made him visible. He could hear helicopters in the distance. The manhunt had gone full scale. Roads were being blocked, checkpoints set up. Mark's name and photo were already on the morning news. He was running out of time. After a few miles, he found an abandoned cabin, half collapsed, hidden by trees. He stepped inside, shutting the door softly behind him. Dust and cobwebs covered the place, but it was dry, quiet, invisible from the road. He sank onto the floor, breathing hard. For the first time since the escape, he was completely alone. He tore off the wet jacket and stared at his hands, bruised, bloody, shaking. He looked out the cracked window. The world outside seemed so close, yet so unreachable. He'd made it this far, but for what? Freedom didn't feel like he imagined. It felt cold, hollow, borrowed. He thought about his mother, the last time he saw her before prison. He thought about the choices that brought him here. Maybe he deserved to be caught. Maybe he didn't. The thoughts raced in his mind until a sound cut through everything. A faint crack of a branch outside the cabin. Mark froze. Another sound, footsteps. Careful. Slow. Close. He reached for a rusty metal pipe lying near the door. His pulse was hammering. A voice called softly from outside. "Mark, you out here?" It wasn't a cop. The voice was calm, familiar. He moved to the window, peeking through the glass. Standing just beyond the trees was one of the men who'd helped him escape, his old cellmate, Rico. Mark's heart nearly stopped. Rico was supposed to be back in San Quentin. He didn't make it over the wall. Or at least, that's what Mark thought. Rico looked rough, torn clothes, mud all over him, eyes wide and desperate. He whispered, "They're not just after you, man. They're after me too. You gotta move. Now." Mark stepped out slowly, still gripping the pipe. "How did you get out?" Rico glanced back toward the woods. "Doesn't matter. They're coming. I saw them on the road." Before Mark could answer, the sound of engines roared again. This time, much closer. Sirens. Voices. Flashlights cutting through the trees. Rico turned to run, but it was too late. A spotlight hit them both. "Freeze. Hands up." The forest exploded with noise, shouting, dogs barking, officers rushing in from every direction. Mark dropped the pipe. His hands went up. Rico tried to bolt into the trees, but a gunshot cracked the air. Then everything went still. Mark turned slowly. Rico was on the ground. The escape was over. Or was it? Because what happened after that shot would change the story forever. The truth behind the escape, the echo of that gunshot hung in the air like thunder. For a few seconds, everything froze. No movement, no sound. Just the distant hum of the bay wind rushing through the trees. Mark stood frozen, his hands still raised. The searchlights blinded him. Then came the shouting. Officers storming through the brush, guns drawn, boots pounding the dirt. "Get on the ground. Now." Mark dropped to his knees, mud soaking through his clothes. He didn't look away from Rico, his friend lying motionless a few yards away. The officers swarmed in. One cuffed Mark's hands behind his back, while another checked Rico's pulse. The radio crackled. "Suspect down. Requesting medical immediately." Mark's voice shook. "You didn't have to shoot him. He wasn't armed." But no one answered. Within minutes, the woods filled with police lights, red and blue flashing off every tree trunk. Helicopters thundered overhead. The manhunt was officially over. Mark had made it almost 8 miles from San Quentin, farther than anyone in decades. But his freedom lasted less than 12 hours. As they dragged him back toward the waiting vehicles, he turned one last time toward the spot where Rico had fallen. For a second, he thought he saw him move, just a twitch of his hand, before the medics swarmed in. They shoved Mark into the back of the SUV, slammed the door, and drove off. The radio chatter filled the silence. Officers were congratulating each other, calling it a clean capture. But Mark just stared out the window at the passing trees, his mind spinning. Something wasn't right. Rico shouldn't have been there. He wasn't supposed to escape. He didn't even have the tools. So how did he get out? And why did he find Mark? in the middle of nowhere, at exactly the right time. Hours later, Mark was back inside San Quentin. His escape suit had been replaced with handcuffs and chains. The entire prison buzzed with rumors. Some said he'd nearly made it to San Francisco. Others said he'd stolen a boat. Everyone wanted to know what had really happened out there. The warden called him in for questioning the next morning. Two detectives from Marin County sat across the table, their faces unreadable. One of them said, "You made history, son. No one's ever gotten that far out of San Quentin. You almost pulled it off." Mark didn't answer. The detective leaned forward. "But what I want to know is, who helped you?" Mark's eyes flicked up. "Helped me?" "Yeah," the detective said. "We checked every inch of that prison. The cameras, the tools, the timing. You didn't do this alone. Someone on the inside had to give you a hand, maybe more than one." Mark stayed silent. His heartbeat quickened. He thought about the maintenance logs, the missing equipment, the way one guard always seemed to look the other way when he worked near the wall. He thought about Rico. The detective dropped a photo on the table, a grainy shot from a body cam in the woods. It showed Rico on the ground, but this time, his eyes were open. "Your friend didn't die," the detective said quietly. "He's alive." Mark's head snapped up. "He's at Marin General Hospital under watch," the detective continued. But before he passed out, he said something strange. He leaned in closer. "He said you weren't the one who planned the escape." The room went silent. Mark blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Of course I planned it." The detective shook his head. According to him, this wasn't your plan at all. Someone inside San Quentin orchestrated the whole thing. Both of you were just pawns. Mark's throat went dry. "Who?" The detective slid another photo across the table. It was a picture of a prison guard, one Mark knew very well. Officer Daniels. Daniels was the maintenance supervisor, the same man who had given Mark his yard job, who'd accidentally left storage doors unlocked, who'd told him which areas had broken cameras. The same man who disappeared from his post the night of the escape. For a moment, Mark couldn't breathe. Everything started to make sense. The blind spots, the timing, the ladder that had appeared at just the right time. It wasn't luck. It wasn't genius. It was a setup. Mark slammed his cuffed hands against the table. "You think he planned this?" The detective nodded slowly. "We think he used you to cover his tracks. We just don't know why yet." Mark leaned back in his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then you don't know Daniels like I do?" The detectives exchanged glances. Mark looked up, his eyes cold. "He wasn't helping me escape prison. He was escaping something else." Mark wasn't the mastermind. He was the bait. But what was the guard really running from? And how deep did this go inside San Quentin? The truth was about to surface, and it was darker than anyone imagined. The inside man for the next 48 hours, Mark sat in isolation. No contact, no news, no answers. The only thing he could think about was the name echoing in his head, Officer Daniels. The man everyone trusted inside San Quentin. The man who smiled at the inmates, joked with the guards, and always seemed one step ahead of everyone else. Now, that same man was missing. When detectives returned to question Mark again, they weren't smiling anymore. "Daniels didn't show up for his shift," one said. "His car's gone, and his home address is empty. We think he left the night of your escape." Mark just stared at the wall. Everything he believed about that night was collapsing. He remembered Daniels handing him an extra set of keys for maintenance access. He remembered Daniels saying, "Don't worry about the cameras tonight. They're offline for repairs." And now it all fit together. Daniels wasn't helping him out of kindness. He was using him as cover. While the guards chased after the escaped inmate, Daniels was walking out of the prison through a side gate, unnoticed, hidden by the chaos. Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "You're saying he escaped too?" The detective nodded. "We think he planned the entire thing. You, Rico, the timing, even the ladder. You were the distraction. While the entire prison was hunting for you, Daniels vanished." Mark's stomach twisted. Why would a guard risk everything to run? The detective paused. "That's the part that doesn't make sense yet." Later that day, Mark was escorted back to his cell, the same one he'd left less than 3 days ago. The inmates watched silently as he walked past, shackled and defeated. To them, he wasn't just another prisoner anymore. He was a legend. The man who almost made it. But Mark didn't feel like a legend. He felt like a fool. That night, as the prison went dark, he couldn't sleep. His mind replayed every moment, every conversation with Daniels. There had to be something more, some clue he'd missed. Then he remembered something small, something almost meaningless at the time. A week before the escape, Daniels had asked him to move a box from the maintenance room to the old supply shed near the yard. Mark never questioned it. The box was heavy, sealed with tape, marked property inventory. He hadn't thought about it again until now. The next morning, Mark requested to speak with the detectives again. "That box," he said. "Check the supply shed by the north wall. Daniels told me to move it there a week before the escape." At first, they didn't believe him. But a few hours later, the lead detective came back, his face pale. "You were right," he said. "We found the box." Mark waited. The detective set a photo on the table. Inside the box were stacks of cash, old case files, and something even stranger, a small metal drive wrapped in plastic. Mark frowned. "What's on it?" The detective sighed. "We don't know yet. But the cash matches a robbery case Daniels investigated 8 years ago, money that was supposed to have been recovered and logged as evidence. Only it never was." Mark's eyes widened. "You're saying he stole it?" "Looks that way," the detective said. "And the files? They're internal reports, records about guards, prisoners, payoffs, even falsified incident logs. It looks like Daniels was covering up something big." Mark's voice went quiet. "So he used me as a distraction to run with the money." The detective nodded. "That's the theory. But here's the twist. We think Rico knew. That's why he went after you in the woods. Not to help, but to get to Daniels first." Mark leaned back slowly, realizing the truth. Rico hadn't been there to warn him. He'd been there to steal the same secret Daniels was running from. By nightfall, news of the corrupt guard had leaked to the press. The headlines exploded. "Inside man behind San Quentin escape missing with stolen evidence. Prison break cover-up linked to corruption ring." But Daniels was still nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, back in his cell, Mark sat quietly, staring at the wall where sunlight from the bars painted faint orange lines across the floor. He was a prisoner again, but something inside him had changed. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about breaking out. He was thinking about the truth. Daniels had used him. The system had failed him. But maybe, just maybe, he could still do one thing right. He called for the guard. "Tell the detectives I'll talk," he said. "But I want to make a deal." Mark's back inside San Quentin, but now, he's the only person who knows where Daniels might have gone. And the deal he's about to make could expose one of the biggest scandals in California's prison history. The deal the next morning, the interrogation room, felt different. No tension, no shouting, just quiet. Mark sat across from the same two detectives who had questioned him days before, but this time, he wasn't the suspect. He was the key. They placed a recorder on the table. "All right, Mark," one detective said. "You said you want to talk. Let's hear it." Mark took a deep breath. "I'll tell you everything about the escape, every detail. But in return, I want protection. And I want my sentence reviewed." The detectives exchanged glances. "Protection from who?" Mark leaned forward. "From the people Daniels was running from." It took hours, but Mark laid it all out. How Daniels had chosen him for the maintenance crew, how he'd whispered small favors that seemed harmless, how the entire escape had been engineered to look like a desperate inmate's idea. He described the nights Daniels would hang around after lights out, talking quietly with certain guards. He mentioned the mysterious phone calls from the warden's office that always seemed to stop when Daniels walked in. When Mark was finished, the room was silent. The lead detective finally said, "You're saying this wasn't just about money. You're saying there's a network." Mark nodded. "Inside and outside the prison," Daniels said once. "Everybody has a price, some higher than others." At the time, I thought he was joking. Now I know he wasn't. Later that day, investigators cracked open the metal drive they'd found in the box. It was encrypted, but not for long. Inside were hundreds of documents, emails, scanned reports, and audio recordings. It was a digital diary of corruption, payments to guards, smuggled contraband, false medical records for inmates who didn't exist. And one file stood out above them all, labeled SQ-47. When they opened it, the room fell silent. Inside was a video file, dated 3 years earlier. It showed a guard's body being carried out of San Quentin in the middle of the night. The report claimed the death was an accident, but the footage said otherwise. There, in the grainy image, was Daniels, standing over the man's body. The detectives called Mark back in. They pressed play on the video. Mark stared at the screen, speechless. "That's Officer Klein," he whispered. "He worked Tower 2. I thought he retired." The detective shook his head. He didn't retire. He was silenced. Mark's jaw tightened. Daniels killed him, didn't he? Looks like it, the detective said. Klein found out about the missing evidence money. Daniels covered it up, then used you to burn the trail when it got too close to him. Mark sat back, his stomach twisting. He had thought he was escaping from San Quentin, but now he realized he had been escaping for it. A distraction to protect a murderer. The story hit the media like wildfire. Corrupt guard behind San Quentin escape, linked to murder cover-up. News vans lined the road outside the prison. Reporters shouted questions at officers coming and going. But Daniels was still missing. Mark's testimony gave investigators a trail. A storage unit rented under a fake name in a small town just north of Sacramento. Inside, they found what looked like a hideout, clothes, a fake ID, and maps of the California coast. It was clear he was planning to run, possibly out of the country. The lead detective looked at Mark's statement again and said, if he's still in the state, he'll go somewhere familiar. Somewhere he can blend in. Mark thought for a long moment, then said quietly, he used to talk about a cabin near the Trinity River. Said it was the one place he could disappear and nobody would look twice. The detective's eyes widened. You sure? Mark nodded. He mentioned it more than once. Always after night shift, when he'd been drinking coffee out of that dented thermos of his. Within hours, a team was on the road north. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the forest near Trinity County. It was cold, silent, almost too quiet. The cabin was small, old, lights flickering faintly inside. Officers surrounded it. One whispered into the radio, we've got movement inside. Someone's here. They kicked in the door. The cabin was empty, except for a single chair, a half-drunk cup of coffee, and a note taped to the wall. It read, you think I'm running? I've been ahead of you since the beginning. Tell Mark I said thanks for the ladder. And beneath the note was a photograph. Daniels, standing on a beach at sunset, holding a passport, smiling. The timestamp on the photo? Taken 2 days ago. Daniels was alive. He was free. And somewhere out there, he was watching the world chase a ghost. But Mark's story wasn't over, because what Daniels left behind would pull him back into the spotlight one last time. The final hunt 3 weeks passed after the discovery at the Trinity River cabin. No sightings. No phone pings. Not even a rumor. Daniels had vanished like smoke. Meanwhile, Mark's deal with the state bought him a small cell in a protected wing, away from the general population. Every day agents came with questions. Every night, he lay awake replaying Daniels' words from that note. Tell Mark I said thanks for the ladder. It haunted him. It wasn't just mockery, it was a message. He knew Daniels. Every move the man made had purpose. The photo at sunset, the ladder reference, the beach. Then it hit him. The photo wasn't random. The shoreline in that picture, Mark had seen it once before. During a repair assignment at San Quentin's east wall, Daniels had pointed out across the bay and said, if you ever get out, look for that stretch of sand. It's quiet, forgotten. That place wasn't in Trinity County. It was right back near the prison, a remote strip of coast north of Point Reyes. Daniels hadn't gone far. He'd doubled back. When the detectives heard Mark's theory, they were skeptical. Why would he return? One asked. Mark replied, because he's arrogant. He thinks he's smarter than everyone. And he left something behind, something he still needs. They checked the digital files again. One folder was still encrypted, marked SQ return. The text couldn't crack it. Mark stared at the screen. SQ, San Quentin. He's telling you where he'll be. That was enough to relaunch the manhunt. 2 nights later, under a pale moon, a small task force moved silently along the coastal cliffs near Point Reyes. The wind was sharp, cutting through the fog like glass. Waves slammed against the rocks below. At the front of the line was Detective Mason, the same officer who'd first arrested Mark after the escape. He spoke into his radio. We've got a signal from the burner phone linked to Daniel's passport photo. It's close. Then, faintly through the fog, they saw it. A flicker of light coming from an old boathouse at the edge of the water. The team spread out, weapons low, flashlights off. Inside the boathouse, a single bulb swayed from a wire. The air smelled of salt and engine oil. And there, sitting at a workbench, was Officer Daniels. His beard was longer, his uniform replaced by a weathered jacket. In his hand, he held a small flash drive, the same kind they'd found in the box. He didn't flinch when the door creaked. He just smiled. Well, he said softly, I was wondering how long it would take you. Detective Mason stepped forward. It's over, Daniels. We've got everything. The files, the money, your prints on the scene. Daniels shook his head. You've got half the story. The other half's in here. He tapped the drive. You think I stole from the system? No. I stole proof of the system. Mark's voice came through the radio from the command post, tense and low. Don't believe him. He's playing you. Daniels looked up toward the sound, almost as if he could hear it. Still talking? Huh, Mark? He said with a smirk. Tell them who really ordered that escape. The room fell silent. Detective Mason frowned. What are you talking about? Daniels stood slowly. You think a guard could pull off all that alone? The missing money, the falsified reports, the cameras offline? Someone higher signed off. Someone inside headquarters. He tossed the flash drive onto the table. That's the real story. The reason I ran isn't because I was guilty. It's because I wasn't supposed to live long enough to testify. Before Mason could respond, the faint hum of a motor came from outside. A black SUV rolled up near the dock. No markings, no lights. Daniel's smile faded. You see, he whispered. They found me first. Then the gunfire started. Bullets rip through the boathouse windows. The task force dives for cover. Daniels disappears in the chaos, again. When the smoke clears, one question remains. Who was really behind it all? To cover up the smell of gunpowder still hung thick in the air. The waves crashed harder now, echoing through the broken boathouse windows. Detective Mason coughed through the haze, flashlight trembling in his hand. Daniels, he shouted. Drop the weapon. But Daniels was gone. A trail of footprints led to the back door, down to the dock, and then vanished into the black water below. The task force swept the area for hours. They found shell casings, a shattered radio, and the flash drive Daniels had tossed onto the table, but no body. No blood. Just an empty dock, and the ocean swallowing every trace of him. By sunrise, the boathouse was surrounded by local police and federal agents. Reporters had already caught wind of the gunfight. Helicopters circled above like vultures. Inside, the agents poured over the drive. It was heavily encrypted, layers of code, firewalls, locked directories. But one folder opened instantly, almost as if Daniels wanted them to see it. It was labeled the Warden's Ledger. Inside were documents listing payments, not to Daniels, but to senior prison officials. Each file linked back to construction contracts, fake inmate transfers, and emergency budgets that never reached the prison itself. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars, siphoned over years. And every single signature ended the same way. W. Harland, the warden of San Quentin. When the warden was confronted, he denied everything. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. Daniels hadn't been running from justice. He'd been running from the people in charge. Mark, watching from his small protected cell, heard the news over a prison TV. The anchor's voice was steady but urgent. In a shocking twist, investigators have uncovered what appears to be a financial cover-up involving senior staff at San Quentin State Prison. The missing officer, Charles Daniels, is now considered both a suspect and a whistleblower. Mark just stared at the screen. I told you, he muttered. He wasn't stupid. He was playing everyone. But something still didn't make sense. If Daniels was trying to expose corruption, why stage the escape? Why involve Mark at all? Then he remembered something else. The first night Daniels had talked him into joining the maintenance crew, he'd said, sometimes, to expose the system, you've got to break it open from the inside. It all clicked. Daniels didn't just use Mark. He needed someone believable, someone desperate enough to make the system panic, to force every corrupt official to move their hidden pieces. The escape wasn't a mistake. It was a trap, one big domino that, once it fell, revealed every crooked connection. And now that it had, the system was scrambling to erase the mess. Back in San Quentin, things grew tense. Guards were suspended. Offices were raided. Inmates whispered about a ghost guard who'd outsmarted the state. Mark noticed more patrols, more checks, more fear. It wasn't about safety anymore. It was about silence. Late one night, a folded note slipped under his cell door. No name, no handwriting he recognized. Just a few words written in pencil. He's alive. Don't trust the deal. Mark's heart raced. He looked around, but no one was there. He unfolded the paper again and saw something faint on the back. A smudge, like someone had pressed a thumbprint into dust. It was covered in sand. The next morning, an agent arrived at his cell. Mark, you're being transferred, he said. Protective custody. Mark frowned. Transferred where? The agent didn't answer. You'll find out soon enough. 2 guards cuffed him, led him down the corridor, through metal doors, into the transport van waiting outside. The vehicle drove for hours, far beyond the usual routes. No radio, no conversation, just the hum of the road. Then the van slowed. The driver spoke softly into a radio, too softly for Mark to hear. When the doors opened, Mark blinked in confusion. They weren't at another prison. They were at an abandoned airstrip, fog rolling across the tarmac, wind howling through the broken hangars. And standing near a small plane, hands in his pockets, was Daniels. He was alive. And somehow, the system had just delivered Mark straight to him. The reunion, the night air was sharp and silent as the van doors swung open. Mark stepped out, wrists cuffed, squinting through the fog. The abandoned airstrip stretched for miles, broken asphalt, rusted hangars, and that small single-engine plane idling quietly near the edge of the runway. And there he was, Daniels, older, rougher, but very much alive. His jacket flapped lightly in the wind. The faint glint of the San Quentin security badge, the one everyone thought he'd discarded, hung from his pocket like a reminder of the life he'd just walked away from. Mark froze. You've got to be kidding me. Daniels smirked. Told you I was hard to catch. The 2 guards stepped aside, silent, stone-faced, then got back in the van and drove away. No questions. No explanation. Mark blinked. Wait, what's going on? Why did they bring me here? Daniels shrugged, his tone calm but deliberate. Let's just say, some people don't want you talking to anyone else. And I'm the only one who can explain why. Mark took a step forward, eyes narrowed. You ruined my life. You used me as bait. Daniels nodded. Yeah, and I saved yours. Mark clenched his fists. Saved me? You left me in the woods bleeding while you disappeared. Daniels sighed, reaching into his coat. Because if I hadn't, you'd be buried in a file marked accidental inmate death. You think those shots came from the guards that night? They weren't shooting at you. They were shooting at me. You were collateral. Mark stared, trying to make sense of it. Daniels pulled out a small black folder and tossed it at Mark's feet. Go ahead. Open it. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance stills from San Quentin, marked with timestamps and names. Each showed a guard or an official meeting off-site, exchanging envelopes, signing false transfer orders. And in the corner of one image was Mark. He looked younger, confused, carrying a maintenance crate. Behind him, a warden's assistant scribbled something on a clipboard. Daniels said quietly, "That's the day they framed you for contraband. You remember thinking that search was random? It wasn't. They needed a fall guy on record, someone they could use later if things went wrong." Mark's eyes widened. You're saying I was set up before the escape even happened? Daniels nodded. Long before. You were a piece in their plan, a name they could throw under the bus when the real crimes started leaking out. But I wasn't going to let them burn you. Mark shook his head. Why me? Daniels looked down. Because you were clean. You weren't part of any crew. You didn't owe anyone favors. You were invisible, and that made you useful to both sides. A plane engine roared in the distance, faint but approaching. Daniels glanced at the sky. We don't have long. Mark stepped closer. You said there were people above the warden. Who? Daniels hesitated, his voice lowering. The same people funding the prison's private contracts, security firms, logistics suppliers, political donors. They've been moving money through San Quentin for years. Every time a new building gets approved, someone takes a cut. And when I found out, they wanted me gone. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a new flash drive. This is everything they didn't find. The part one couldn't let fall into their hands. Mark frowned. So why give it to me? Daniel smiled faintly. Because no one will suspect a prisoner. They'll look for me, not you. Mark took the drive hesitantly. What's on it? Daniels met his eyes. Names, dates, payments, and something else, something that proves who signed off on the kill order the night of your escape. Before Mark could respond, headlights appeared at the far end of the runway. A convoy of black SUVs. No sirens, no markings, just silent approach. Daniels cursed under his breath. They found us faster than I thought. He grabbed Mark's shoulder. Listen carefully. Run to the hangar, follow the path behind it. There's a tunnel that leads to the road. Don't stop. Don't look back. Mark shook his head. I'm not leaving you again. Daniels looked at him, the first time with something like regret. You already did once, remember? Then he pushed Mark toward the shadows. Go. Mark hesitated for one last second, long enough to see Daniels pull out his gun and turn toward the headlights. The first SUV screeched to a stop. Men in tactical gear jumped out, shouting. Gunfire erupted. Mark sprinted into the fog. The airstrip burned behind him. Daniels' voice echoed in his head. Don't stop. Don't look back. Somewhere in his pocket, the flash drive pulsed like a heartbeat, the key to everything. But if what Daniels said was true, Mark had just become the most wanted man in California. The flash drive, the world blurred around Mark as he ran through the fog. His lungs burned, his heart pounded, and the roar of engines behind him faded into the night. He didn't stop until the airstrip lights were only distant dots. Finally, he dropped to his knees beside the dirt road, gasping for breath. The flash drive. Daniel's final words replayed in his mind. This is everything they didn't find. Mark pulled the drive from his pocket and stared at it under the moonlight. Small, cold, silent, but heavy with secrets that had destroyed lives. He knew he couldn't take it back to the authorities, not yet. Not when the same people who framed him might still be inside the system. So he did the only thing he could think of. He ran. By sunrise, Mark had made it to the outskirts of a small coastal town. He found an internet cafe that hadn't opened yet, pried the back door loose, and plugged the drive into a dusty computer. A password prompt appeared instantly. Below it, a message. Only the one who carried the ladder knows the code. Mark froze. The ladder. Daniel's note from the cabin. Tell Mark I said thanks for the ladder. He thought hard. That night of the escape, the ladder had 7 rungs. Daniels made him count them twice. 7. He typed 7 rungs. Nothing. Then ladder 7. Still locked. Finally, he tried San Quentin 7. The screen flickered, then opened. Hundreds of files appeared, labeled by dates, initials, and project codes. At the top, one folder called the list. He clicked it. The screen filled with names, politicians, business owners, prison board members, all linked to payouts, false contracts, and manipulated trials. And at the very bottom, one name made Mark's heart stop. Detective Mason, the same man who'd arrested him. The same man who'd led the investigation against Daniels. A video file was attached. Mark clicked it. Daniels' voice came through the static. He looked straight into the camera, his face tired but steady. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. Mason works for them. Always has. Every time I got close, he was the one cleaning up the mess. You were never supposed to survive that night, Mark. You were bait, and I was the cover story. Daniels looked away for a moment, then back at the lens. But maybe, for once, the right person ended up holding the truth. If you want justice, don't bring this to the cops. Bring it to the press. Let the world see what they buried inside San Quentin. The video ended. Mark sat frozen. Everything, every lie, every setup, every death, came crashing into focus. Daniels wasn't just trying to escape. He was trying to expose the people who had turned San Quentin into a business of corruption and blood. And now, it was up to Mark to finish what he started. 3 days later, headlines exploded across the country. San Quentin corruption scandal. Inside source leaks explosive evidence. Detective under investigation in prison cover-up. Missing officer confirmed whistleblower. The files were everywhere. And though no one knew who leaked them, the public finally learned the truth. Mark disappeared again, this time not as a fugitive, but as a ghost. Rumors said he fled to Canada. Others claimed he was living quietly under a new name. As for Daniels, no body was ever found. But every few months, a sealed envelope would show up at a newspaper office in California, filled with documents that only one man could have written. Always signed with the same 3 words, "Keep digging, kid." And that's how one desperate inmate and one rogue guard exposed a system built on lies. From a prison break to a full-blown conspiracy, this story proves one thing. Sometimes, escaping isn't about running away. It's about breaking free from the truth they try to bury. If you made it this far, you're officially part of the crew. Smash that like, drop your comment. Do you think Daniel survived? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life crime stories that will leave you speechless. Because next time, the truth might just be closer than you think.